One thing we take for granted, or maybe we're blinded by capitalist realism, is ethnic food and how it can differ in taste and quality depending on not just who's making it, but who they're making it for. Our guest today has a monthly column in Dissent Magazine where he explains to his readers that food is a social product of capitalism. Apocalypse Chow will explore how physical tastes are socially produced. For the first column, Arun explains why the best tasting Chinese dumplings tend to be the cheapest. And this is all a quote from the intro piece. Future columns will tackle the rise of platform foods like pizza, burgers, and sandwiches, the spread of fake bistros in Paris, America's crucial role in popularizing Japanese ramen, the production problem that led Starbucks to invent the Frappuccino. I'm very intrigued on that. Why culinary authenticity is real. And I'll recommend some great restaurants along the way. And the eye is Arun, of course. As a graduate of the French Culinary Institute, former chef and restaurant reviewer, currently working as an investigative reporter, as well as a guide for historical food tours around New York City, Arun takes a sensual approach to food, one that understands it is a source of tremendous joy and belonging, fraught with fears and anxieties, and a site for heated political battle. How we understand food and cuisine can teach us a lot about how capitalism shapes our daily lives. Food can show us how to build a future rich in social, cultural, and culinary variety, where we don't just rethink labor and work, family and gender, but experience them in endlessly delicious ways. Please welcome. He will also be a disembodied voice on this show, coming all the way live from a bistro in Paris, where I'm sure there's a cigarette hanging out of his mouth as he's talking to us right now. Arun Gupta.
A cigarette and un verre de vin.
Or I should have said with the holder.
Yes, yes. Thanks for having me on. Glad to be here.
Thank you for joining us today. Would I be cheating if I asked you to explain the Starbucks Frappuccino creation? Because that was too juicy of a thing to start off with.
No, not at all. So this is something that's in my book, Apocalypse Chow. That's where the Dissent magazine column comes from, and I'm hoping it'll be out in a couple of years or so. It's been an interesting adventure. So what I try and do is use the tools of Marxist political economy to understand taste itself. Now, we see these tools incredibly important and really can help us understand the role of labor, production, distribution, consumption, like, where do you shop? How do you shop? Like, taking the car to a supermarket, buying all these box goods, or even not doing that anymore, Amazon deliveries or whatever.
Mhm.
But Marxism is almost never, at least in the popular press, applied to taste, because and I make a very strong distinction between the academy and intellectuals and the popular press, and they talk about food in very different ways. And I think one of the big problems with how most people, what you'll see unless you're immersed in food studies, is scientific reductionism. The idea that tastes are a product of neurobiology, chemistry, physiology. And sure, obviously, there is a physiological component to taste. It matters a lot. But it does not explain why we eat the things that we eat, or even why we like the things that we like. And something, I think the Frappuccino is a good way to kind of ease it to it both to like understand some of the tools of political economy, as well as how taste is constructed. I've only ever had a Frappuccino once, and I thought, I'm not going to say it's terrible, right? It's basically, it's an adult milkshake. That's all it is. It's a caffeinated milkshake. And I actually did it for a friend helped me. We did a short film where we were talking about the Doritos, Locos Tacos, and Frappuccino, because they're both very similar marketing campaigns. but we're looking at it also from the precisely from the perspective of taste. So I'm not sure when. I think Frappuccinos have been around what, like 20 odd years, early
Probably.
2000s.
Yeah.
So in Capital Marx, I think volume two, maybe volume three, he talks about the production time problem. Let's say you're a factory owner in the early 1800s in England, and you have a, a jam factory. And so during the summer, you're following the seasons or the harvest, right? So you have the strawberries that come in, and then maybe the raspberry, peaches, uh, black. I don't know if they grew blackberries in England at that time, and then you'll have in the fall things like the hard stone fruits, like pears and apples. But when it came winter time, there was nothing. So the capitalist, what he does is, because of course it was always he in those days, he can shut down the factory, he can turn off the basic utilities that existed, no more cold deliveries, shut the water off, and then you just have a security guard who watches the plant while it's mothballed. But that plant still is a huge capital investment. And you, as a factory owner, want to be producing 24/7. Now, this story is I actually get from David Harvey because I took all three classes on capital with him. And he said what happened is some capitalists figured out that there were these huge crops of oranges that were coming into season over the winter in Spain, in Seville region in particular. And so he started importing them. That means that you can now operate the factories basically the whole year long. And it also explains why marmalade became so popular. It's considered, kind of an quintessential part of the British breakfast. And my parents grew up in colonial India, and I was actually born in England. And there was always marmalade on the breakfast table, even though I didn't like it. I like strawberry jam, but that's also because it's childish taste, right? Children don't like bitter stuff. So in any case, we can apply the same. Starbucks had the same exact dilemma. So Starbucks, I guess, is what it's like the first wave of the coffee revolution.
Yeah,
They're
the
the one.
coffee bar, the first coffee bar in the States, I think. Well, like that model, right?
Well, the reason I say that we're on like the third or fourth or maybe even fifth wave of the it's just
Yeah.
like it's all, I don't even keep track of them. It's just like who knows what wave we're on at this point. But Starbucks is the one who made the idea of like, hey, that coffee should cost as much as like a beer or a cocktail in a bar, and you should consider it like this kind of little luxury treat. Um, for yourself. And so, they have what is it, like 11,000 stores. They're actually classified as a fast food joint
Mm.
around the United States. And then, of course, they're also engaged in a vicious union busting campaign. So you should not go into a Starbucks. So in any case, so they had this problem in that they would get this morning rush and it would kind of last through lunch. But after 2 p.m., boom, the stores were dead. And it doesn't cost much to keep the store open, right? What do you have? You have light, you have a little electricity, a little, gas or whatever to keep the water hot. And then you have some like, minimum wage worker who's getting paid shittily. But so you could keep it open, but they weren't getting any traffic. So they end up buying this other company. This is how corporations become big. It's not because they're such great inventors. It's that they leverage their capital to buy other people, other companies that have invented stuff. So in this case, they buy a company that basically has a Frappuccino like drink. And what they do is they realize that they can take this and basically create a new eating opportunity. and they create the Frappuccino happy hour. And what they do is they convince millions, tens of millions of Americans that, hey, when it's late in the day and you're feeling sluggish, it's like 3 or 4 or 5 o'clock and you need a pick me up, and your dinner's hours away, or you're going to be stuck at the office, come into Starbucks for the Frappuccino happy hour. And so now, if you live in a business district,
Mhm.
boom, you can go in there around 4 o'clock, and there'll be lines of people getting frappuccinos and other similar drinks. But unlike a coffee, which black coffee obviously has 0 calories in it, espresso 0 calories, and all that. A regular frappuccino's got, I think, something like 500 or 600 calories, and they
Mhm.
go up there. Like, I think you can, when you start to do all the add-ons, they could be 1,100 calories or more. But essentially, what Starbucks did was they convinced millions of Americans that, hey, you can have a coffee, even though it's really a milkshake, as a pick-me-up later in the day. And they turned it into a billion-dollar product. And those are often known as category killers. A food product that's making over $1 billion by itself. But what they're doing is externalizing costs onto the rest of society, right? If you are having all this sugar and fat, between lunch, between dinner, people are going to be gaining weight. They're going to be having the risk for obesity-related diseases, like cardiovascular disease, like diabetes, stroke, different types of cancer rise that then society has to pay for. And so, it's an interesting phenomena of how they dealt with what was essentially this production time problem. Uh, and you know, so I'll let you jump in if you want at this point.
No, no, no. Keep going. This is great.
Mhm.
So, this now. What's also interesting about it is, who was it? Was it Taco Bell that had the fourth meal campaign,
That was Taco
or
Bell, fourth meal. Yeah.
right? And
Chicken.
so,
Yeah. Yeah.
if you've ever, now y'all may experience this, like, you do fundraising for your show, right?
Mhm.
So I've published a number of newspapers. I did the Independent, the Occupy Wall Street Journal, some others. And there's a rule in fundraising. The person most likely is to give you money is a person who has already given you money. And this is this hard and fast rule of the fast food and processed food industry. You'll see these statistics about, like, 80% of Americans visit McDonald's every month. And don't quote me on these numbers. But McDonald's, though, they actually segment their customers into different groups. And there's heavy users who come into McDonald's, I think, at least once a week, once or twice a week. And then there's super heavy users. They're coming into McDonald's more than 3 times a week, often every day. And the thing about, like, the super heavy users accounts for, I think, like, less than 10% of their customer base, but they produce over 60% of their revenues. And so I actually found, something from a long, like, decades ago, where McDonald's was doing the same thing, that they were trying to invent a new meal. And so what we literally have is companies who are basically trying to get people to shove more food in their pie hole, more highly processed, fatty, sugary, salty foods. And don't get me wrong, there's a lot of processed foods that I love. Like, I love Doritos, I love Oreos. I'm not a fan of them. They're
Mhm.
almost all terrible. I do like Popeye's fried chicken. That's about it.
You
Uh,
are a good man. That's why.